Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, thank you guys for clicking on this video. So a lot has happened since my last video. So in my last video, I spoke to you guys about stepping out in faith, and one of the areas that I was stepping out in faith was selling my existing property without having another one to move into. But by the grace of God, all that's been sorted out. I'm in my new property, as you guys can see. At some point I will give you guys an apartment tour, but in this video I'm going to be speaking about the process of selling my shared ownership property, some of the ups and downs that I faced, and hopefully to give you guys some ideas or at least some things to think about before you either purchase a shared ownership property or before you start the process of selling one. Okay, so just to give you guys a little bit of background, so I bought my property in January 2018. I bought it for $305,000. I purchased 65% of the property. So I decided to sell my property in, I believe it was August 2019. I reached out to my housing association and basically said to them, look, I want to sell my property. And the first thing they said to me was, you're going to need to get an independent valuation. And they came round and they valued my property. Now, the first catch with selling a shared ownership property, and I'm not sure if it's like this for all housing associations, that valuation has to be valid for the entire process of the sale. So up until the point when it comes to the transaction, you have to have a valid valuation. The next issue was that my housing association said to me that I had to sell my property at the marked valuation price. So basically, if I achieved a price less than the marked valuation, I would need to pay the difference. However, if I achieved more, then I would get to keep that difference once the sale had gone through. Now, I don't know if you guys know much about buying and selling property, but generally what I've seen is that you usually negotiate on the price. You usually don't pay the asking price. The price was non-negotiable, and if it was negotiable, then I would have to make up the shortfall. So once I got the valuation done, housing association then get an 8-week nomination period where they find a buyer. Now, so when the valuation was done, my property had actually increased. So I bought it, like I said in the beginning, for $305,000, and it was now worth $320,000. Also, sorry guys, if you can hear background noise, it's because my washing machine's on, so I apologize. So what that meant now was that a 65% share, rather than being worth the 198,250 that I bought it for, it was now worth like 208,000. It meant that you needed a £20,000 deposit. Now, if you're doing shared ownership, you don't usually have £20,000. If you did, you probably wouldn't be doing shared ownership. Is within those 8 weeks, I had maybe 3 viewings, but each time somebody came, the feedback I got was, this is too expensive. So that's another thing to be aware of, and I did mention this in my previous video, is that if you are thinking of doing shared ownership, think about the percentage that you're buying, because the bigger percentage, the harder it can be for the housing association to sell that once you decide to move on. So after the 8-week period, they didn't find a buyer, and I know it was because of the price. So then they say to you, okay, you can now go and sell it on the open market. So what does that mean? That now means that you find an estate agent and you sell your property at 100% of the value. So rather than selling the share, you're now selling 100%. And from a legal perspective, it's something called staircasing. So once you actually complete on the sale of the transaction, you staircase from whatever percentage you're at. I would staircase up to the 100% to get that transaction through. So I went onto the open market and I used Purple Bricks. The good thing about Purple Bricks is it works really well if you're in a highly sought after area. So if you have a property in a kind of like, you know, gentrification area, up and coming, sought after, people will go on to say Zoopla or Rightmove or something like that, have a look for the property, it will go through to Purple Bricks, and then it will go through to your listing and people will book viewings. Now, the downside, and this is what I found, is that the area that I lived in, I was in the suburbs of London. I was in a countryside development. So 2019, Boxing Day, they listed my property, and then I got a few viewings. However, the feedback again that I was getting was that it was too expensive. And they felt like 320,000 was just too big of an asking price. So anyway, kind of moved on to like March, and then COVID happened, and obviously all the viewings had to suspend. I think it was in June or maybe the first week of July, and that the government lifted the restrictions and you could start having people viewing properties again. However, by that time, my valuation had expired. To pay another fee to get an up-to-date valuation. Now, the good thing is that my property had dropped in value. And I say good because it now meant that it was more attractive. Now, if I was 100% owner of the property, I would be vexed. I would be sweating. I would be anxious. I would be like, what? Like, how am I going to pay back my mortgage? But the good thing for me is that my mortgage was only 188,250. So now even at 292, my property was actually worth the 65% share. I think it works out to be 188,500. Now I'd obviously been paying my mortgage back over the years that I'd lived there, so it had obviously decreased from the 188,250 mark. So I was good. So unfortunately, Purple Bricks was still unable to sell my property. So even when it went down to the 292 mark, I got a few more viewings, but nothing serious. So at this point I was kind of panicking because I'd paid that Purple Bricks fee up front. And anyway, during that time I got a letter through my door from an independent estate agent, Hutton's Management, I think they're called. They're an amazing estate agent, guys. I'm going to put a link in the description below. And he was like, look, I can see your property's been sitting on Purple Bricks for quite a while now. There doesn't seem to be any interest. Once it's been listed for quite a few months, it can be quite hard to sell it because now people are starting to think, is there something wrong with it? So he was like, let's give it a fresh new look. So essentially, if he didn't find anybody to buy my property, then I wouldn't have to pay him. But if he did, then I'd be paying him 1%. Now, obviously, was I thrilled at the possibility of having to pay more? No, but I wanted my property sold. So I let him do what he needed to do. And guys, he found a buyer within 5 days. And he found a buyer, he got the offer, and we were moving. However, once I got the offer, there were still many different hurdles that I needed to go through. So the main thing and the biggest hurdles that I found with selling shared ownership is that when you're doing like a normal property transaction, so it's not shared ownership, you've got you, so you're the seller, and you've got your solicitor. Then you've got the buyer and the buyer solicitor. Now with shared ownership, you've got you, your solicitor, you've got the buyer solicitor, plus you've now got the housing association and their solicitor. So things can kind of get a bit lost in transit. There's a lot of pushing, so I found the process to be quite stressful because I was having to chase so many different people. Another thing another thing that happened that I wasn't expecting was extra costs. So once I told the housing association that I wanted to sell back in 2019, they gave me a list of things that I needed, but I did find along the way that there were extra costs that I needed to pay for. So overall, I'd say there's a few things to like watch out for and to inquire of. So the first thing is that valuation point. Now I'm not sure if all housing associations require this, but they may require you to basically have, like I said, an up-to-date valuation throughout the entire selling process. So make sure you're aware of that. Is that if your valuation expires just as you're nearing exchange or completion and your property's increased, then you're going to need to go back and you're going to need to say to them, like, I'm really sorry, but my property's now gone up by £10,000. Are you willing to pay that? And they may be like, no, I'm not. The second thing I'd say to be aware of is hidden costs. So like I said, there was some costs that came up that I wasn't expecting, that I wasn't aware of, that I hadn't budgeted for. So just make sure you're aware of all the costs, that you speak to the housing association and get everything up front. You can even say, look, on your website or in the documentation, you list A, B, and C. Can you let me know if there's anything else that I'm going to need to pay for? The next thing is the staircasing. So I kind of mentioned it a little bit at the beginning. So essentially, the buyer is buying the property from the housing association. Now, solicitors typically charge a bigger fee for doing that, and I think I actually had to pay an extra £225 plus VAT just to do the staircasing. The other thing to be aware of at the moment in the UK is something called cladding. Unfortunately, due to the tragic case of Grenfell in 2017, one of the things that escalated the fire in that building was something called cladding. It's material that is wrapped around the outside of a building. Because of what happened at Grenfell, the government have brought in new regulations. I think they came in December 2019 around cladding, and there's loads of different rules now around the types of cladding that you can have. Now, a lot of new builds in the UK have this cladding. Therefore, anybody who's looking to buy a property and it has cladding, the lender will require you to produce an ESW1 certificate, which is basically an external wall certificate. Now, the only people who can produce this certificate, there's a few surveyors that can do this. There's only, I think, about 350 of these surveyors who can do it. However, the number of properties that are suspected to have cladding outweighs this number. And unfortunately, one of the things that lenders are saying is no certificate, no mortgage. So that's another thing to be aware of. Okay, so overall, my conclusion, would I do shared ownership again? No. No. The process was way too stressful. I think there were so many parties involved, which was super stressful. Like I said, when it came to selling, having to chase the housing association, having to chase the various lawyers, it all got very, very sticky. The restrictions around selling, so the fact that you have to give the housing association a nomination period in order for them to be able to sell it, which means that you're basically waiting back while they choose and find an allocated buyer. So you could have had a buyer quickly. If it was on the open market, you could have had a buyer within that 8 weeks, but now that's delayed while they find somebody who's suitable. So you can't sublet your property under shared ownership either. And the other thing as well with shared ownership is that no matter what percentage you own, whether it's 25% or 50%, you are considered a homeowner. So if anything goes wrong with your property, you are responsible for it. So whether you've got like pests in your home, whether you've got leaks, whether you've got issues with your plumbing, whether you've got issues with your walls, external stuff, whatever it is your responsibility to fix it. And that's the other thing that I thought was quite unfair, because say for example you only own 25% and the majority you're paying in rent, so you're paying all of this rent to this housing association, yet if something goes wrong with your property, they expect you to fix it. So I think for me personally, I feel like the downsides outweigh the pros, and the main pro is that you get on the property ladder, but that's it. Okay guys, I really hope you found this video helpful. If you yourself have experiences that you want to share with me, please put that in the comments. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask me questions. You can send me a DM on Instagram and hopefully I'll be able to help you guys out. But yeah guys, I really hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found this advice useful. And yeah, if there's anything you want to know, then please just let me know. Okay guys, thanks for watching this video. As always, if you like, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in my next video.